Hello and welcome to the Construct Cast, the place where we build things together. My name is James Darian and I will be your host. First of all, I want to welcome you. This is our inaugural podcast and we will be getting our foundation right here today. So, first things first, the Construct Cast is going to be a podcast where I bring up many ideas in an open, free-flowing format. This is not scripted. This will never be scripted. The purpose of this podcast is to come up with an idea, think of a concept, and build on it as far as we can. So, with that said, again, I thank you for listening, and let's get started. So today, we're going to be discussing the concept of the value cost of inflation over time. So I have a special name for this. I call it chronoflation. That's just a term that I coined for myself. Whenever I think of this concept, I may not use it too much over this podcast, but I want you all to hear this term and maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't. We'll see where we go with it. But basically, the idea of the value cost of inflation over time is that inflation builds up without people even recognizing it often. And I feel like this is very essential. People talk about 3% inflation, 5% average annual inflation. It doesn't sound like much of a big deal. With a 5% inflation rate, though, you're doubling your costs every 15 or so years. It's actually 14.4 or something like that. If you do the rule of 72, you can find out what the rate of doubling is, which is 72 divided by the percentage of inflation for anything to get often the cost doubles. That's just a short introduction for some technical aspects of inflation. But what I really want to get into is not just the monetary economic value cost of inflation, but the social value cost of inflation, the social chronoflation, that's how I would like to call it. I just find that funny because that used to be my username. But what I want to bring up with this is, in a recent post, I talked about rudeness being a virtue. And that sounds incredibly contradictory. It sounds very unappealing to most people. Most people do not want to be rude. I like to think that people are generally kind and they want to give respect to other people. However, the entire point of that article that I wrote was that kindness and respect have gone through massive amounts of inflation recently. They have been devalued through overuse and abundance. Now, with the cost aspect of respect going down, we have a few things to talk about with this. So, first of all, what happens in a society when everyone expects and demands respect? When we have our students growing up in colleges that refuse to offend them because they must show respect to everyone. This is a big issue about the whole respect thing, is that you can't offend anyone if you're respecting them. You don't offend people you respect in general. That's maybe a bit of a... I may not have any background data to support that, but I believe that's something that most people could agree upon, that without the need of background data, if you respect someone, you do not want to insult them, you do not want to cause them any form of distress, you want to make their life easy, and you want to show that you appreciate them. But what we've done is we've taken away the earning of respect. And this is a big problem for our society. This is a big problem for a lot of people. Because now, wherever any of these college students or even high school students or elementary or anyone goes, where they've been given respect their whole life by everyone, suddenly they expect it from everyone. And not just everyone they meet, but everyone they will meet. If a child is respected by an adult, then that child is going to grow up thinking that they deserve respect from everyone. They basically have a mindset of royalty and entitlement to respect because they've never had to earn it, because it's always been given to them because they were some golden child. And they may even mistaken themselves for Jesus in the flesh. But that is neither here nor there, I suppose, for the purpose of this conversation. I really just want to get across the image of what the social aspect could be, a social cost could be of of the inflation of respect over time. But that's not really even half of it, because when we look at the entitlement of these people, we also have to consider the cost of showing true respect to people, where respect is really demanded and required, or when you find someone who actually has earned a true showing of respect. How do you show respect to someone who has truly earned it when you're already giving respect to everyone? There's a difference here, and it may be subtle, but there's a lot of different aspects. And you always see this in shows with like mob bosses or someone of authority who rarely ever will give out a compliment. So what do they do when they really want to show that someone's done a good job, when someone's really stepped up to the plate? Well, that's when they give their compliment. And then that is when a person feels like, I've earned this. I have just been given so much respect by this person. And now I appreciate them even more because they recognized my efforts. And in modern society, that's very rare to find. I mean, if we even just look at the way a lot of corporations work these days, you can find examples of them bending to the mob whenever anything happens. You could just look at the Starbucks incident where some black people wanted to come and use the bathroom in Starbucks, and they had a policy of, you're not a customer, you can't use our bathroom. Very simple policy, very standard, nothing racial about it. Simply, hey, we don't want to pay to clean bathrooms for people who aren't paying us for our service. We're not an outhouse. That's basically what the policy was. But lo and behold, there ended up being a big racial mob about it, and the next day, Starbucks very publicly got rid of that message, and they publicized how their bathrooms were open for everyone, and a week later, you could not walk in a Starbucks bathroom without pins and needles sticking through your foot. That may be a bit of an exaggeration, but there definitely was an issue that came up after that, because Starbucks chose to give respect to some offended mob of people who were not even customers. And perhaps some of their customers did align with this mob, but there is that issue there. You see that, and you can see it in areas of authority. You can see it in the leaders of the Democrat Party literally bending their knee to pledge themselves to Black Lives Matter or something like that. You have Mitt Romney going out in the protests and taking videos of himself, vlogging, saying Black Lives Matter. And it's truly a despicable pandering, but it shows how even our leaders are so willing to just throw respect to anyone, to everyone who comes to them with a grievance because they don't want to offend anyone, or at least they want to appear that they do not offend anyone. And this is what culture we have built, because we've devalued respect so much that not only do we expect to get respect from everyone, but we expect to see people give respect to everyone. That's really dangerous. That is incredibly dangerous, because that can be manipulated. If people who don't deserve respect are being given respect, if they are being given the authority that comes with being respected, well, then suddenly you can get a tyranny of people who do not deserve respect, and because they do not deserve respect, they will abuse it. People who earn respect, typically they're not the people who are going to abuse respect, because abusing respect is not respectful. It's contradictory. But when you have all of these mobs, all of these group activities, all of this craziness, and you start giving respect to that, it completely devalues it. It devalues the respect. It empowers people who should not be empowered. It empowers people who, not just people, organizations as well, that simply have not done their part to earn it. And we have the confusion now with how people show true respect. People don't know what true respect is anymore, because they're so used to being spoon-fed it. They're so used to being spoon-fed the sugar of, I would call it a false respect, but I'm not sure if that's the right word. Because is there any difference between showing a sign of respect casually or with seriousness? Is there any real difference? There may be a subtle difference, and I believe that is a very important subtle difference. But when we think of things on a grand social scale, on a grand societal scale, what is going to be the difference of respect earned versus respect given freely? There's not going to be much of a differentiation that your average person is going to make. At least not, well, actually, I'm not even going to say at least not, but because we have these examples of businesses and politicians and leaders simply caving as a quote-unquote sign of respect to people. And that is honestly ridiculous. So when I want to discuss the chronoflation of everything, essentially, we look at things like respect. We look at things like monetary policy and the value of money, the value of currency. The US dollar has lost 96% of its value in the past 100 years, or more now, and it's going to be more because the US government is printing more money this year basically than ever before, because they took out $3 trillion in debt, basically doubling our debt for the year. Or basically, they're increasing their total expenses by 75%. I think our total usual budget is $4.5 million, and we take in 4.5 trillion, and we take in 3 trillion in tax revenue. Well, we already spent all that. And our government's not going to shut down. Even if they shut down, they're still going to just have all these extra expenses. And you have political leaders now wanting to spend more money, reallocate more money, blah, blah, blah with money. They do what they want. So we're losing value. Money is not just... It's not just money. It's not just something that you trade to get something else. It's not just paper that you trade to get something else, or a swipe of a credit card. What money is a measure, an intangible measure of value for what you have traded. And if your money is being devalued, then that means what you're trading is being devalued. And I mean, you can raise your price, suddenly have more money, but still, that is losing value every year. Everything you do loses value every year. And we have to consider this mindset that we've created ever since we established the Federal Reserve and started this trend. Because prior to the establishment of the Federal Reserve, the U.S. had a consistent deflation rate for our currencies of roughly 4%, basically every year outside of a peak during the Civil War that was very inflationary, like 96% inflation, actually. So, I mean, we basically got 100 years worth of inflation in 1 year, but it immediately went back to deflation. And there was another one during another wartime. So there are moments of inflation, of course, but the general trend was deflation, which means what you did today had more value tomorrow. The money you kept today has more value tomorrow. If you spend $100 today, then that $100 is worth $104 tomorrow. Or worth $104 next year. That's a pretty big deal because it creates wealth accumulation. And if you sell a product today and you sell it for $100, well, next year your $100 is worth what was $104 the year before. Well, that sounds pretty good, I would think. And I think most people would agree, like, hey, you mean that I'm getting my money is worth more and more every year? It sounds pretty good. It sounds like a way to build wealth, to create wealth, and it sounds like a way for communities to expand and really thrive. Now, I know there are some economics aspects around this that I don't know all the details of. There are reasons why the government says that 3%, 2% in annual inflation is good. I don't necessarily believe when they say these things, but those are the claims. Those are typical claims of anyone involved in monetary policy in the modern sense. People do not like inflation, and or they don't like deflation. I'm sorry, but I mean, if we really want to give Americans a chance to grow, if we really want to give Americans a chance to accumulate wealth and just have that wealth for generations, for them earn it for themselves and their ancestors and their ancestors' ancestors. Sorry, did I say I have said ancestors. Sorry, for their for their offspring and their offspring's offspring, their children's children's children. They want to last in their lineage for generations. And that can be great. You can really know that what you do today is taking care of your family forever. But that's not the way the world is right now. The way the world is right now is what you do today will effectively be worth nothing in 100 years. What you do today will be worth less than 4% of its current value in 100 years. How crazy is that? I mean, you could invest, of course, and you can make more money than inflation and have more value, but that doesn't sit right with me. I mean, the average American, they can do a bit of saving, they can do a bit of investing, but by and large, they're forced to rely on means that are not necessarily guaranteed. They're forced to rely on something that can be pretty difficult and tenuous, and while just investing in a mutual fund can net you 8 to 12% average annually based on historical trends, I mean, that's still not a guarantee. And if people start doing individual investments, if they say, hey, I like this company, and that company goes belly up, they're done. They're bankrupt. Like that. When I think about the betterment of American society, when I think about the American dream, we want everyone to be able to achieve that dream. America allows you to pursue happiness. It doesn't mean you're going to achieve it. It doesn't mean that you're going to succeed. Most people won't. But the way we're moving, the way we've adopted inflation in all aspects of our society, not just in social values, but in monetary values, in almost every aspect of our society, it's really gonna, I feel like it's a knife that we're slowly pressing into our own chest. What is the cost of a cell phone today compared to 20 years ago? 20 years ago, when small cell phones, I suppose I should say, were relatively new, Blackberries and stuff like that, was maybe a couple $100, and ooh, that was really expensive. But now they're $1,200. Well, that's outpacing inflation. And yeah, the technology is fantastic these days, but costs keep going up. And I mean, inflation is the way of expressing costs in modern terms, translating it over time and whatnot. But some stuff just seems, it just seems to me that we're losing control. Some aspects increase faster in cost faster than others. Some are slower and pretty steady. I mean, I don't believe a gallon of milk or a bundle of apples has really changed much in price over the years. But I believe this is something we need to really be conscious of because it affects everyone. And then not only do we have these systems, we have the systems of modern taxation where we have modern taxation that can just it can really hurt some people. I mean you're taxed based on your wealth, based on the value you bring into this world. Your money is taken from you, and I'm not sure how I feel about that, honestly, because one of the only alternatives is that you're taxed based on what you own. So, property taxes, basically, do you ever really own something if the government says, yeah, if you can't pay me a certain proportion of the value of that, we're going to take it from you? I had a coworker, their family owned a home for about, I don't know, 60 years locally, and the price of housing went up in the area, and they couldn't afford it anymore. Their small little, it may have been originally bought for $40,000, this home, maybe 60. Now it's well over $1 million, and they couldn't afford the taxes. That's crazy. And again, this is stuff like inflation that causes this. This is, if we had a deflationary currency, then the taxes would actually go down every year. The taxes you would have to spend less dollars almost every year, simply because of the nature of the currency having more value. So I think that would be at least a way to mitigate these types of issues. But there is there are so many aspects of this topic. I'm not going to be able to go over all of them in this podcast. But I wanted to just bring up some of these ideas and get you guys thinking about, hey, what is the social inflation over time? Like, what has really happened culturally because of social inflation, of specific characteristics, things that people like to hear, becoming things they expect to hear, becoming things they expect to hear from other people to other people. The monetary inflation of a wealth accumulated in one age that you think will last your family for generations, almost being guaranteed to be worthless in just a couple decades, or maybe a century. What real long-term value can any modern person bring to the world? At least in these terms. For me, I believe the only modern things of value that have lasting effects are, I would say, deflationary in nature. I would say things like social commentary. If you go back, you can read the great philosophers of the Enlightenment period. And not only does it teach us something about the age that they grew up in, but it can help us improve our age. And there's something you can always go back and learn and develop and build forward. You can grow it into something more. That's the deflationary value of ideas. Maybe I'll need a new term for that too. But I believe that is one of the few aspects of modern society that may be able to be considered deflationary, but honestly, we're not even going to know for many years. That's the sad fact of it. But there's many things we need to stay alert of, and we need to remember that the slippery slope is just a version of inflation. We know that inflation happens over time. We can see the changes in society, in monetary policy, in value of currency, words, possibly ideas. That one's still up in the air for me, but we can see how things lose their power over time. They lose their value. And we want to make sure that we don't let arguments lose value over time too. So let's think about this idea. A lot of times people bring up the slippery slope and they talk about it as being a fallacy, but I believe that that is simply not correct, because we see things lose value over time every day, and it's always one more step. It's just that much easier. When you take one step, the next one's easier, because you can't take the second step without taking the first. So we also need to just be aware when we're talking to other people, when we see the slippery slope happening, when we see that there's a chance that we could be talking to someone and that could be something that they're making happen, something that they're pushing for. They're pushing towards something. We have to remember that there is a long-term cost to all of this. There is a buildup over time for every little bit that you concede. With every step that you take, the next step becomes less valuable, and it's easier to concede it. This is something that I don't think people consider. I see the world in economic terms in many ways. That it's simply the vision I use. And it's my perspective that every little detail that you give, every concession, just it breaks things down a little bit more. Well, it's been a half hour, and I think that's a good spot to leave off for now. I just want to have a final idea to kind of think about, and maybe I'll go into more detail with it next week or another time in the future. But on review, we talked about chronoinflation. We talked about the value cost of inflation over time. We've talked about how it affects society, culture. We've talked about the economic cost. And there is the argument cost that I wanted to bring up towards the end there, just as a bit of a weird idea. It's not a phrasing that I think people would consider, but it's one that I wanted to let you guys think about on your own, and you can reply to me, you can write or post or do whatever. Remember, we are a free channel here, so you can comment away. Just use our coupon code CCFree to subscribe, and you can get all of my content for free and contribute yourself. And I hope you guys do consider contributing. I look forward to what you have to say, and I will see you next time.